Recently on this channel, we discussed the topic of Joe Biden trying to create a disinformation board under the umbrella of Homeland Security, and of course, Nina Jankowicz, the woman who is tapped to be the leader of this board. We talked about how this person was clearly somebody in favor of internet censorship. She quite literally would sing about internet censorship.
Information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie.
And of course, how she repeatedly, time and time again, pushed mainstream Democratic misinformation and labeled things that were inconvenient for her side politically misinformation, i.e. the Hunter Biden laptop, which turned out to be, of course, 100% true. But our efforts were not in vain. We were not just screaming into the wind. Apparently, the outrage, the hysteria that we generated about this board that was going to coordinate the Biden administration and the Democratic Party's censorship efforts did actually break through, and Nina Jankowicz actually resigned from her post at this board, and the Biden administration decided to pause this obviously unconstitutional board. Now, that being said, of course, Nina Jankowicz is very upset about this. Of course, her allies in the media are very upset for her, so she went on a little bit of a cry tour, and she appeared on Chris Hayes' show to talk about how everybody was just using misinformation and disinformation in order to get rid of her position at the board. Now, of course, she resigned because she knew she was unfit for this position, but it was just misinformation and disinformation, which means, according to her, who, wants to go after misinformation and disinformation, yielding to it shows how ineffective she would have been, even if we believe in her true purpose. We're going to get into this. We're going to cover this. We're going to dive deep down into the water, snorkel our way through this. But first, we got a sponsor. Let's throw it over to them and then come back and talk about it on the other side. The hottest temperatures of the month are right around the corner. Summer is in fact here. This is why I highly recommend that you guys go over to Easy Summer Cool and get yourself one of these 4-in-1 air conditioners. They work really well, surprisingly well. It's recommended you put cold water in there. I put lukewarm sink water in there, and I'm legitimately surprised about how cool it is. It's also pretty quiet. Not sure if the microphone is picking up the fan after turning it on. And again, it will save you money on your power bill. And right now, if you go to easysummercool.com, you can get 50% off. Perfect for those small rooms with windows too small for air conditioning units, or as something to keep right on your end table, right by your bed for some quick cool that isn't going to break the bank. easysummercool.com. Yes, that is easysummercool.com. So as we talked about in our previous video, the idea that the giant problem in the United States of America is misinformation and disinformation is just a political tactic being yielded by the left wing in this nation in order to increase their own power. A perfect example of something that they do very similar to this is talk about how voter suppression, voter ID, and how the Republican Party are trying to make their way to prevent black people from voting, only to see an increase in black turnout the following election, because this isn't about actual voter suppression. It is, in fact, about ginning up hysteria, telling people that they're denying your right to vote, so you better come out and vote, and the effects that that would in fact have. This is what they're doing in the disinformation space. It's what they did in the voter ID space. It's what they will continue to do when it comes to voter ID, because they think this is a workable tactic. And one of the ways you know for a fact this is a workable tactic is you just look at the people who are obsessed with disinformation and misinformation. Perfect example of this is one Hillary Clinton, who of course was the person behind the Russia smears against Trump, even though there was no evidence for that. The left-wing media pushed this over and over again. They told us time and time again that the Mueller case was going to prove out the connection. They spread lie after lie about servers communicating with Russian banks that were located in Trump's office in New York, and all this other nonsense that just turned out to be fake. Did they apologize? Did they acknowledge that they were lying? No. When we got up to the 2020 election and the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, they were all labeling it misinformation from Russia because that was their proven tactic that they believe in fact worked. And in fact, Nina Jankowicz, the woman who is totally going to run this board in an unbiased, totally fair way, totally not a partisan hack, was actually tweeting out stuff related to the Hunter Biden laptop story, labeling it Russian disinformation and misinformation. So that's who who they were going to set up to do this. It's not an accident that this woman was tapped for this. It's not just coincidence that she happens to be a left-wing hack. They were trying to gin up the hysteria to create this board and then put one of their stooges in charge of it so that they can control the flow of information in this country. But Chris Hayes, of course, somebody who's on the side of the Democratic Party, would never let you know that, so we're going to dive into his interview with Nina Jankowicz, where he talks about what a sad, miserable victim Nina Jankowicz is, and how this board is in fact desperately needed.
In April, the Department of Homeland Security announced the creation of a Disinformation Governance Board. It would be an entity to work to combat the very real, dangerous issue of disinformation online and elsewhere.
Now, you could tell from the intro that the setup already concedes the point that this department was just going to counter the very real and very serious threat of disinformation on the internet. We need the Homeland Security to regulate the internet to counteract this very, very real, very, very serious threat. And now we're going to talk about the woman who is definitely qualified for this, is definitely not a partisan hack, who was tapped by the Biden administration to go after this very real and very serious threat to this country that's very real and very serious. Disinformation and misinformation online on the internet.com. Oh my god, we gotta stop the disinformation. Lord and Savior Nina Jankowicz, please come tell us how wronged you were.
Now, the woman appointed to lead that effort is a woman named Nina Jankowicz. She's a former disinformation fellow at the Wilson Center and the author of the book, How to Lose the Information War, which is about international relations and disinformation.
So I just want to point out one thing that I kind of find hilarious and not a lot of people are taking note of. The Wilson Center is named for Woodrow Wilson. If you remember that fire in a crowded theater Supreme Court case, that was due to the fact that Wilson was prosecuting people who were criticizing World War I. So he labeled them to be foreign agents, he labeled them to be bad people, and then he went around the First Amendment and used government power to punish his political opponents. That's where she comes from, the Wilson Center. Now, of course, I'm sure they have plenty of academics that come out of there that aren't crazy authoritarians like Woodrow Wilson, but it is funny that she is trying to step into the same role, and she obviously believes similar things about how government power should be used, hence her speech or talk about how we have to get around the First Amendment.
So I think it's time for us all to scrape our jaws off the floor and get to work. Not only Facebook, which has clearly been basically intransigent in fixing its own problems, but Congress, which through its own, partisanship, has really lost a lot of time and created such a large hole that we now find ourselves in, with Facebook now, moving into the metaverse, which frankly, I want no part of if Facebook is at the helm. They've shown no corporate or technological responsibility to bring us into an area that could open us up to more and more harms. And we need Congress to do something about it, just like they would regulate an unsafe vehicle or airline. Well, Allie, I think that for a long time, congressmen and women just didn't believe that online harms could become offline harms. Around this time last year, I was testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, and one of the members of that committee really took issue with my thesis that disinformation was dismantling democracy. And I thought of him on January 6th when, protesters were storming the Capitol. This is clearly a public safety issue, and now that is being laid bare before us with these Facebook papers. So hopefully this is a wake-up moment for Congress people. Obviously, there are free speech issues to get around here, but this is a country of ingenuity, right? If the European Union can do this, if countries like Estonia can counter disinformation, they're small, they have less money than us, then why can't the United States do it? Let's step up to the problem and protect people.
And we're all just supposed to ignore our history and not talk about the Woodrow Wilson Center and Woodrow Wilson's history on the First Amendment and treating his political opposition horribly.
But almost immediately after the announcement, a right-wing frenzy ensued, helped along, I think, by the vaguely ominous title of The Office, and she found herself on the receiving end of a concerted campaign by the very same forces disinformation her office would face, now attacking her and undermining her credibility with wild conspiracy theories and lies.
So what's funny about this is despite the fact that Chris Hayes talks in a low, very serious voice, despite the fact that he's wearing his glasses and his suit and he's sitting on this TV set like a very mature and smart man, is that he just totally gave away the game right there. He said the very same forces of disinformation that this board is meant to combat, which was just people online criticizing this policy from the Biden administration. Remember, the whole premise of this interview, the whole premise of Nina Jankowicz's defense of herself and of this board is that it has nothing to do with domestic policy. It has nothing to do with censoring speech on the internet. In fact, the Disinformation Board is actually pro-free speech. They're trying to protect your free speech on the internet.
To protect Americans' freedom of speech, civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy while we were doing all of that work. So every characterization of the board that you've heard up until now has been incorrect.
But Chris Hansen just labeled the people who were criticizing her and her position and the creation of the position the very same forces of disinformation that Homeland Security was going to go after. And Nina Jankowicz, by the way, does not correct this. She does not say anything about this because Chris Hayes, just like her, are in the club. They're in the club of elites that are trying to use government power in order to forward their agenda. So labeling their political opposition the agents of disinformation and misinformation is what they're all about. That's what this board was about. And people will say, oh, this board had no enforcement power or whatever. This was a formal board that was going to be contacting social media companies on their behalf in order to counter disinformation and misinformation, aka things that the Biden administration doesn't like, in order to forward their political agenda.
Well, Chris, it was going to do exactly what you said. All these sensationalist narratives about what the board was, what people thought the board was going to do are completely wrong. It was a coordinating mechanism. It was meant to, make sure that the very large agency that is the Department of Homeland Security, that people were talking to each other within it.
So at this point in time, when I'm shooting this video, I've actually seen a bunch of people cover this story. I've seen a bunch of people cover this interview in particular. And normally I don't watch other people's coverage, but I was on vacation for all of last week, so I ended up missing out on a lot of news. So I needed to catch up on stuff, on what I was going to make videos on, so I could deliver them to you. And one of the things that people don't harp on, one of the things that people don't notice, is the utter absurdity of the statement that she just gave right there. She just talked about how this was obviously meant to be a coordination system within the behemoth that is the Department of Homeland Security, because I don't know if you know this, the people in the Department of Homeland Security aren't talking to each other. They're just not communicating information. And here's one of the benefits of actually having a memory that goes back further than 8 weeks, that goes back further than 8 days or 8 minutes, not to be throwing shade at all these content creators on the internet.com who didn't pick up on this. But Homeland Security was specifically created to coordinate between the different departments in the United States post 9/11. Remember, one of the excuses for why the government didn't catch on to this plot is that the FBI had some information here, the CIA had some information here, and they weren't able to put the pieces together. They weren't able to coordinate this. So the fact that we're 20 years later, 21 years later, talking about Homeland Security, instituting something within Homeland Security that's just meant to make them communicate within the Department of Homeland Security, when the whole purpose of Homeland is to communicate information from all these other departments, is an absurdity that needs to be acknowledged. It's stupidity compounded on top of stupidity, and it just goes to show you that the Homeland Security Department has no legitimate function. It did not need to be existence. Republicans really shamed this country when they added another giant cabinet level bureaucracy post 9/11, because all it apparently did, according to the people who aspired to work there, is make it more complicated for them to communicate information, which is the sole purpose for this department, the justification for it existing in the first place.
So let me give you an example. FEMA, the agency that handles disasters and environmental issues, would often counter misinformation about natural disasters. And let's say a foreign adversary like Iran or China perhaps would put out a narrative that says, oh, here's how you get out of this city, or here's where you can find disaster aid. And that could put people really into danger, their lives into danger. That's the sort of disinformation and misinformation that we were looking to support the department in addressing, to make sure that they had best practices.
So this might sound sensible to you if you don't think about it for more than, 5 seconds. What if there's a natural disaster and China and Iran are telling people how to get out of the city and it's not accurate, or they're telling them where disaster relief is and it's not accurate? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to counter it without Nina Jankowicz countering this misinformation and disinformation? But the thing is, whenever there's a national disaster, whenever any part of the country is subject to a hurricane, earthquake, or whatever, people don't turn to Homeland Security or FEMA directly. They turn to the news media, and typically what they'll turn to is national cable news outlets that are American, or they will turn to local news. The idea that local news or national cable news is going to be spreading wrong information or disinformation or misinformation on purpose on where to get out of a city or where to get disaster relief is absurd. You don't need the Homeland Security in order to do this. Now, if you're talking about massive messaging from a bunch of different companies or countries or whatever that are trying to mislead people, we already do that in national disasters, and it ends up leading to people getting information directly on their phone where to go. So the idea that we're talking about Iran hacking into the cell phone carriers and then distributing this disinformation at a time of national disaster is something that cybersecurity should worry about, not Nina Jankowicz, who is in no way qualified to address that situation. In no way, shape, or form is this legitimate unless she's talking about maybe a Facebook post would be put up and then you would just contact Facebook and say, hey, look, they're telling people how to leave the city. This is incorrect. Can you do something? Again, no purpose for Nina Jankowicz in this situation. And she was also already talking about how FEMA puts out their own messaging in order to counteract this already. So what are we even discussing?
And most importantly, to protect Americans' freedom of speech, civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy while we were doing all of that work.
See, she was just trying to protect your free speech and your civil liberties and all of that. I mean, she said specifically that the First Amendment is an obstacle for her to get around in terms of what her goals are in terms of policy, but she swears she was going to protect you. I mean, think about what happened if China said you have to get out on exit 4 to get out of a disaster, but in reality, it was exit 3. Wow, we got to stop you. Nina Jankowicz, hallowed be her name. She gonna save us.
And frankly, it's kind of ironic that the board itself was taken over by disinformation when it was meant to fight it.
Well, actually, you didn't get put in charge and this board wasn't activated, so it wasn't taken over by disinformation. It was taken down by accurate information and concern and your own clips, your own videos of you in your own words showing your hand and showing what you believe. So what you're doing now is disinformation and misinformation. What you're doing now is lying to the American public about who you are and what your intentions are.
How would I feel back in 2005 under the Bush administration if the Bush administration had announced this thing with this title, right? And they had appointed someone that I thought was, a Republican or conservative, and it felt like, okay, well, here's the use of the state, right? State power to patrol speech or to claim things are disinformation that they don't like. Like, what do you say to people that say, look, even if your intentions were good or this was just bureaucratic, that even stepping into this zone poses some non-crazy alarms for folks that are concerned about that kind of thing?
So CRIES actually brings up a good question right here. He uses an example where he wouldn't like who was appointing the people to censor speech on the internet, but here comes Nina Jankowicz to just deflect from the situation and say, oh, it's not about policing speech. Don't worry about it. I'm amazing in every possible way. I once talked to a Republican at one point in my life, and so therefore I'm not partisan hack, even though I was clearly tweeting I'm with her, even though I was clearly pushing Hillary Clinton propaganda campaign, and of course I was appointed by the Biden administration for a reason, and I'm from the Wilson Center, which is a left-leaning think tank, totally not partisan, don't worry about it. I'm Nina Jankowicz. I'm such a great singer on TikTok.com.
Well, I fully understand Americans' concerns that they don't want government involved in policing speech. And good news, this initiative wasn't involved in policing speech, and neither was I. I think, it is important that our government get involved when we have real threats to our national security. So it's not just things like election interference, which we've seen and which DHS has combated also, but threats at the border, disinformation that is driving people to migrate here, disinformation that could affect critical infrastructure like our financial systems and gas pipelines. All of that has very real effects for the safety of Americans. And frankly, I think DHS and other federal agencies need to be involved because this problem isn't going away. It's only getting worse.
Look, they're totally interested in your safety, and she totally wasn't trying to regulate speech. Don't worry about it. I mean, she just named a bunch of different things that this department was going to go after. First and foremost, she named things that Homeland Security can already address, that the media can already address, and that anybody in government can already address, like disinformation, telling people to migrate to the border. But the thing is, people are migrating to the border because Biden ran on open borders policies, and he's instituted policies at the border that incentivize people to run to the border because they think they can get in. But number two, there's also, if you spread bad information about financial stuff or anything really, like honestly, that's gonna hurt your safety. So we really need Brigade Homeland to go and save your safety. You will probably die if not for Nina Jankowicz saving you. Just think about your safety. Nina Jankowicz, stunning and brave. What a hero. Nina Jankowicz, just so brave, so beautiful, so amazing, such a great singer.
And I spent a lot of my career, testifying both before Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the aisle, advising foreign governments about how to build resilience in populations. People need the tools to to navigate today's information environment. It's incredibly overwhelming. And so I had hoped that we would do some creative programs to equip people with the tools they need to find that information in today's information environment, not to say what was true or false. That was never the intention.
So again, you have her saying, oh, look, we're not here to tell you what's true or false or anything like that, but we're trying to combat the false disinformation, and we're going to give you the tools, and they're cutting to B-roll of like apps or whatever, so that you can stop finding that dumb, idiot, fraudulent information that is just information Nina Jankowicz doesn't like, and that will give you the tools, because Nina Jankowicz is your better, and she needs to train you to stop being stupid and stop disagreeing with the Democrats, and to give you the information from Homeland Security so that you could trust them. I'll tell you, it's totally not a ministry of truth. It was a total mischaracterization, but don't listen to what her words say and then actually think about it for more than 10 seconds.
Disinformation is false or misleading information spread with malign intent. So that's when we have those bad actors, our foreign adversaries like China, Iran, maybe Russia, spreading that stuff.
So now she claims, of course, it's not anything political. It's totally fine. I mean, she's going after all these countries. It's funny that she hesitates to say Russia, because the Biden administration and she was not hesitating to talk about Russia before. But the reason she does that is because people know and understand that Russian disinformation or misinformation is used as a political tactic by the left wing for things that they don't like. So she's hesitating to say this because she knows for a fact that people have caught on to her lies, and she doesn't want to jump on board with this. But then, of course, we go to the sad hour. We talk about how sad her life is and how everybody's miserable and all that, and how, oh my God, she's such a victim and we're so suffering. Wow, wow, wow.
And then beyond that, it wasn't just, these mischaracterizations of my work, but it was death threats against my family. Over the last 3 weeks, I have maybe had 1 or 2 days I didn't report a violent threat, something like, we're coming for you and your family. You and your family should be sent to Russia to be killed. Encouragement of me to commit suicide. All of those have been forwarded to the Department of Homeland Security's security services. And, that's not something that is American. That is not how we should be acting when we have disagreements about policy in this country. I think we need to learn how to be adults in the room.
Now, look, obviously you shouldn't threaten people. You shouldn't threaten their families. I would think that threatening Nina Jankowicz's family was a little bit absurd because, who's going to go out of their way to threaten the 52 animals that are in her house? Because obviously she gives you those animal collector vibes. But, maybe she has a husband. Maybe she's happily married. Maybe her kids are just such stunning and brave kids. And you shouldn't do that. It's shameful. It's disgusting. I don't like that. And again, she was tapped because she aligns with the mission of Homeland Security. So your targeting and your ire should be directed at the government that wanted to put her in place rather than her for her beliefs. Because if she just had her beliefs on her own and she had no place in government, no potential influence in government, no big deal. We have a bunch of those people that are in favor of censorship all the time throughout our society. It's unfortunate, but it's not worthy of scorn. The real target, the real thing that we should worry about is this board, because what they're going to do, because they're pausing it, is put somebody up after they scrub their history and you can't really get a good gauge on what they believe to run this board in a couple of months when hopefully, according to the Biden administration, you would have forgotten about it. It's very important that you don't forget about this and you fight back against this and you point out that all the rational justifications like border disinformation or FEMA information going out to the victims of natural disasters, that is all in place right now, and you can combat that, and you can use trusted delivery systems to make sure people aren't harmed by foreign actors telling them about the wrong highway exit to get out of the city, because all of these people are total invalids that can't get out of the city without, of course, Homeland Security and Nina Jankowicz telling them which way to turn, left turn, right turn. You can't figure it out without Nina Jankowicz. What even is Google Maps? You can't do it. Just trust me, you need her to save you.
When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice or vote. Oh!
Now, overall, I accept this victory. I accept the unconditional surrender of Nina Jankowicz, and I think we should all do so, but also be cautious, again, of the next person who's going to run this. But that being said, I leave the floor open to you. If you like this video, you can show them by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can leave me comments and whatever. You can support me via the support links in the description box of this video. This has been me talking about the disinformation board head having to resign. Till next time.